page 940, correct. So again, Parakeh, Be'ever Yarden, Be'ever, third line from the top. Be'ever Yarden Be'eretz Moav, Ho'il Moshe Be'eretz HaTorah Zos Leimor. Moshe clarified this Torah. Rashi says in 70 languages. So Yochanan Brody asked an excellent question yesterday. You know why it's an excellent question, don't you?
Because you had to look it up.
No, it's an excellent question because I have an answer. If I have an answer, it's an excellent question. If I don't have an answer, then it's a technical side question. It's not. If I have an answer, that makes it a good question. So I actually, the question was, why was Moshe Rabbeinu here? He translates into 70 languages, whereas later on in history we find that when, how do you pronounce his name? Ptolemy, with the silent P, like he was a psychologist probably, and he had pneumonia. And he was, what do you call it? So this Talmud, it had the sages translate the Torah into Greek, and the Gemara says it was a day of calamity when that happened. So I actually sent the question to Rabbi Bradowitz, because very good question. Now the answer I gave you yesterday was that this was done by Moshe Rabbeinu, so that for the benefit of the Jewish people, so that they'd understand the Torah, be able to learn Torah in all places and in all languages. Whereas Ptolemy had an agenda. He was a goy who wanted the Torah translated into Greek, probably so that he could engage in Bible criticism of some sort. And I sent the question with the answer to Rabbi Bradowitz. Rabbi Bradowitz said that it's a good question and it's a good answer. So I got Rabbi Bradowitz on my side, which is why it's an excellent question and an excellent answer. Number one, they always have it, Rabbi Bradowitz. When Rabbi Bradowitz got your back, you're good. And then he told me that it could also be that this was commissioned by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't doing it on his own. So when it's done by Hashem, so then like anything else in the Torah where we find that, for example, causing pain to animals is forbidden, but if Hashem says to push the goat off the cliff, then that becomes permissible. Again, that's Hashem makes the rules, and when Hashem decides to break the rules, so then it's perfectly acceptable.
What I'm saying is, if he translated it to 7 languages, why didn't they just give Ptolemy that translation?
So I don't know if they first of all, they didn't, that is, I definitely have an answer for it. They did not give him this translation because there were certain things they changed for Ptolemy. That they changed because they didn't want him to see. For example, it says Bereshis bara Elokim, which could be translated as Bereshis created God. So they translated as Hashem created Bereshis. Hashem created at the beginning instead of the beginning created God. Bereshis, if they translate, then tell me who's looking. And that kind of substantiates our idea that he was looking to pick. There's also there's a certain animal called an arneves, which is a rabbit of some sort, and they just called it. They changed the wording because his wife's name was Arneves, and they didn't want Ptolemy to then feel the Jews are making fun of me. They put my wife's name into the Torah, and other changes that they made independently. He took 72 sages and put them in 72 different rooms, and told each one translate the Torah. So he's looking for contradictions, and then with Ruach HaKodesh, they all made the same changes. They all wrote Hashem bara Bereshis, and they took Arneves out of the Torah. Why her name was Arneves? Don't ask me. I don't know. I can't answer, but I'm just telling you what they did, and it was clearly because he had an agenda. Number one. Number two, I then saw there are commentaries who say that it wasn't what Rashi, the question is according to the way Rashi says that he translated 70 languages. There are other Meforshim that say that Be'eretz HaTorah means 70 languages means Shivim Panim LaTorah. And Shivim Panim LaTorah means, and it's not limited to the number 70, it means there are 70 different sides or literally faces of Torah. That means every idea in Torah has limitless explanations. And Moshe Rabbeinu explained the Torah. He gave them perhaps 70 different explanations for each pasuk or each concept or whatever it was that he was explaining. But we always say you could have different ideas in Torah. I mean, one of the most one of the ideas people struggle with is, you have a machlokas Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. And when you have machlokas Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, then we know the Gemara says, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. Both are the words of the living God, but the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Meaning you're both right, but the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Now, how can they both be right? There's a famous case in court where the prosecuting attorney said, he said something, and the judge said, you're right. And the defense lawyer said something, he said, and you're right. And so some guy said, well, they can't both be right? He said, you're right too. And so, how could they both be right? How could Hillel and Shammai? I want to show you something. A very important concept in understanding how Elu ve'elu, how could both be right. Now, imagine we are the pilot pen company. That's the name of my pen. It's a pilot, right? It's second only to Parker, a far distant second, by the way. We are the pilot pen company. This is our new model pen. And I want to market this one. We want to market this one. We are the board of directors of the pilot pen company, and this is our new model pen. You have one word that we will describe this as the blank-shaped pen. Now, what shape would you describe this as? You get one word only.
Cylinder.
Cylindrical shaped pilot pen. What would you say? Anybody else?
Triangle.
The triangle shaped pen. Okay, with a little bit of imagination. Anybody else? The rocket shaped pen. Anybody else? And you could say what somebody else has said, by the way. You could say cylindrical, triangular, or rocket shaped. Anybody else? Yes. Clarinet shaped pen. Okay, but I'm looking for somebody. Anybody want to say what anybody else has said? Okay, now those are our four candidates. How many of you say rocket shape? By a show of the hands, how many say rocket shape?
That sounds cool.
That sounds cool. How many of you, especially since you said it? No, you said cylindrical. Okay. How many of you say cylindrical? How many of you say triangular? And how many of you say, what was the last one? Clarinet. Clarinet. Okay, so first of all, what I would tell you is like this. We're the board of directors. Now, is it wrong to say so? I think it looks cylindrical. Is it wrong to say it looks rocket shape? I don't think that's wrong. I think that's also right. What's going to be the decision? The decision is going to be based on what? On the majority. But no, because it's my company, so I'll make the final decision. But normally, we would be making it, assuming we make it, so we are going to call this the rocket-shaped pen, because that was the majority. Now, cylindrical is not wrong. And even clarinet-shaped is not wrong. It's a little bit, just means somebody on LSD suggested it, but it doesn't, it's certainly not wrong. Triangular, I wouldn't say, and therefore, you see, in halacha, the way we would view it is we'd say, yes, cylindrical is right, rocket-shaped is right, and that's going to be the halacha. Clarinet-shaped is right, triangular is reform. Right? You're not even on the chart. You're not even on the chart. That's reform. That is, I'll get to you one second, Avi. Now, what the Ritva says, there's actually one of the great commentaries, the Ritva, in Tractate Eruvin, on page 13, where this argument appears in the Gemara. So the Ritva says, for every question in halacha, there were 49 options of kosher and 49 options for not kosher, 49 options for tameh, 49 options for tahor. And as long as you arrive at that conclusion, applying Torah properly, that's an option. How are we going to paskin? Well, paskin by the majority, but you're not objectively wrong. You're not objectively wrong. A lot depends on what angle you're looking at it from. What shape is this? Well, if you're looking at it from here, you'd say this is pointy shaped because you're looking at the point. If you're looking at it from here, you'd say it's an elongated shape. So you're not wrong and you're not wrong. It depends on the angle you're looking at it. If somebody said this looks like a ball, then you're reformed because it does not, whatever else, it's a square shape. It's not square shape. You know, there was a Rabbi Gottlieb told, there was a famous story. There was a guy sitting in a class, in a college sociology class, and the instructor was looking at the class list, And he said, McCarthy, you're Catholic, aren't you? He said, yeah. You want to tell us something about your religion for a couple of minutes? He gets up, speaks for about 5-10 minutes. Looks at another name. He says, Ahmed, you're a Muslim, aren't you? Want to tell us something about your religion? So Ahmed gets up. He tells us something about his religion. He says, Goldstein, you're Jewish, aren't you? Want to tell us something about your religion? He says, well, I'd love to, but I can't. He says, why not? He says, I'm Reform. He says, well, don't you think you ought to know something about your religion before you reform it? What does reform mean? Reform means to change. Change it. That's what reform means. Just a fancy way of saying change. It's like in evolution, spontaneous mutation. It's just a fancy way of saying a sudden accident, that the bird sprouted wings suddenly, or the fish sprouted wings suddenly, right? Which obviously is madness. So it's just a fancy way of saying something that it's like when the politician says, well, I didn't mean that, my words were taken out of context, that simply means I lied. Right? It doesn't. So it's just a fancy way of saying it. So elu ve'elu, they're shivim panim laTorah. There are many different explanations for Torah. That's what one of the commentaries says. I'll get to you one second, Avi. But there's a fascinating idea here, because the word be'er is a Torah means to clarify the Torah, right? Be'er is a Torah means to clarify the Torah. That's what be'er means. It also means a be'er. A be'er is a well. And the commentary said that Moshe Rabbeinu was like an overflowing well of Torah, of wisdom that he was spewing forth. That's why it's called a be'er. A be'er is a well. Now, in the future, the Gemara, sometimes we learn the Gemara and we come to a point where the argument is not settled. And the Gemara says, teku. Teku. Now, what does teku mean? What does the word literally mean?
Let it stand.
Let it stand. It stands. It stands. Now, there are those, the Maharal, the famous Maharal, had a brother, and his brother is the one who said that teku stands for, it's a Rashi Tevos, it stands for Tishbi, which Eliyahu is Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Tishbi. Tishbi yitaretz, he will resolve, kushios, the difficulties, the ibayos, and the questions. Tishbi, and so that's how we were taught in the Cheder in day school. We were taught that that's what teku means. Teku means that Eliyahu is going to go. It's not what it means. Teku means it stands. Even in Israel, modern Israel, a tie game is called a teku. So, but the acronym is that Eliyahu Hanavi is going to come along and he's going to end up, answering the questions for us. Now, it's just very interesting because if you look in the pasuk again, it says, Ho'il Moshe Be'er es Torah. Ho'il. Moshe began to clarify the Torah. If you take a look at that word Ho'il, very interesting, rearrange the letters of the word Ho'il rearranged spells Eliyahu. Right? So who is it that's going to clarify the Torah for us? Eventually it's going to be Eliyahu Hanavi who's going to come along and clarify the Torah. Wait, Avi, what are you going to ask?
Oh, I was going to point something out and then ask a question on it. Your example with the pen. So, we all kind of gave different answers. Cylindrical, rocket shape, clarinet, triangle. Almost like all of those answers have something in common with each other, and like they sort of all play into each other with some minor differences. Like, for example, a rocket is cylindrical, but it has like a pointy shape at the top. And when you called Reform people, like, they would say triangle. Well, it's because they only got the tip of it. Only the tip of it is like
right, which is true. So that's all that Reform really has is the tip of it. That's true.
Yeah, there are
Yeah.
so many inappropriate jokes.
And you're not going to make any of them. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I want to ask, is Torah the same way, where it's like even like disagreeing opinions?
In subtleties, it's certainly subtleties. Beis Shammai, you have to remember that Beis Shammai, Beis Shammai knew Beis Hillel's argument, and Beis Hillel knew Beis Shammai's argument. Like we always say in the Gemara that Rashi and Tosos asked a question on Rashi, and Rashi knew that, but he maintained his position. He obviously knew what Tosos' objection was, and he maintained his position. So we don't know what Rashi would answer to Tosos. And the same thing, Hillel and Shammai, they agree. I agree that you're being logical, and you agree that I'm being logical, but sometimes a certain logic sits with you more than another logic. You'll find that when you get married, that you're being logical and your wife is being logical, and her logic somehow is better than your logic. What's the proof? Because you're going to do it her way regardless. So obviously she was being more logical. So I told you, even as we speak, my wife is out with my credit card right now. So I hope she maintains the logic. But at the end of the day, that's what the Meforshim say. Now, in Pasuk Vav, Hashem Elokeinu diber eleinu b'chorev lemor. Hashem spoke to us in Chorev, and he said, Rav lochem sheves bahar hazeh. You have been here long enough. Now, if you take a look at Rashi, right column, 7 lines from the bottom, right column, Rav lochem shevet, kipshuto. The plain meaning is, you've been here long enough. V'yesh medrash agoda. Harbe gedula lachem, a lot of prominence, v'schar, in reward, al yeshivaschem bahar hazeh, by sitting at this mountain. By sitting at Mount Sinai and receiving the Torah, that's going to provide us with a lot of prominence and a lot of reward. Asisa mishkan menorah v'kelim, you made the mishkan, you made the menorah, you made the utensils. V'kibaltem Torah, menisa b'chem Sanhedrin, sorei alofim sorei, many benefits by being at Har Sinai. And then it says, Pinu sulachem, now turn and go. And Rashi points out that they had to be forced away to a certain extent from Har Sinai. Now, why is it that the Jewish people, the Medrash says, they were resistant? They didn't want to leave Har Sinai. And why don't you want to leave Har Sinai? And the answer is that the Jewish people at Har Sinai experienced something, the revelation of God, which is a level of prophecy. And prophecy was described by all prophets, all Nevi'im. Once somebody experienced prophecy, prophecy was such a spiritual high that a Navi, once he experienced prophecy, he spent the rest of his life trying to re-achieve that experience of prophecy. That was the magnificence of the experience. I went there, a woman said to me, unfortunately, it's a couple that was, they had all sorts of issues. And her husband was a Baal Tshuva for many years. And she once was pouring out her heart, and she said to me that her husband, before he became a Baal Tshuva, he was a drug addict. He was addicted to heroin. And he's never, ever felt and reached a level of satisfaction even though he was a completely Torah observer Jew, and he was completely off of the drugs, but he never reached the fulfillment and the satisfaction that he had from that experience of heroin. So I'm not telling, don't leave here and say, Kaplan said we should become heroin addicts, and you will never experience it. It just that the spiritual high was such that the Jewish people felt the presence of God at Har Sinai. Now you're telling them, okay, now turn and start heading out towards the desert. Whoa, I don't want to do that. You ever been near a campfire? Hold on the question. You ever been near a campfire and, and you have to move back from the campfire and let somebody else, and it's nice and warm over there, you're like, ooh, I don't want to move. I don't want to move away from here. This is nice. It's warm. It's cozy. I'm comfortable. And that's what Har Sinai was. Har Sinai was that experience, number one. Number two, it's the same thing. This used to happen on Sundays. You go to a movie Sunday night, and you're lost in this movie, and all of a sudden, the movie ends, the lights go on, and your first thought is, oh, brother, class tomorrow. And I didn't study for the test yet again, the one that I was going to plan on studying for over the weekend, which I kept putting off, and now I know I'm dead. And they're like that, and it's just that blah feeling of now I got to walk out into the world of reality. So again, it's only an analogy, but here they were at Har Sinai, and they weren't eager to leave. Now, somebody had a question. No. Somebody else had a question.
Yeah. Wasn't also their resistance to leave because of how they sent the spies over?
They're leaving Har Sinai because they just didn't want to leave. They're in a very comfortable place right now.
Yeah.
The spies is when it comes later on to going into the land of Israel.
Yeah.
That's as far as resistance to Israel. Here's just I don't even want to leave here yet. I'm not even holy by spies yet. I just don't want to leave my home base over here because I'm too comfortable. So then the Torah says, take a look at Pasuk Yud. Hashem says, look, I've given you the land. And then in Pasuk says, you know what? We're going to read these psukim. Pick it up from Pasuk Ches. Re'ei nasati lifnechem es ha'oretz. Look, I've given you the land. Bo urshu es haaretz asher nishba Hashem la'avoseichem la'Avram Yitzchak Yaakov l'seis lahem ul'zarmachem. Come to inherit the land which God has given is sworn to your forefathers Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to give them and their offspring after them. And look at the very next pasuk. Va'omer aleichem ba'esahi leimor lo uchal levad iseiseschem. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I said at that point, I cannot carry you alone. At that point, I said, I cannot carry you alone. I will, and that's where Moshe Rabbeinu requests that he has judges who are going to help him out. What's the connection over here? And then the very next pasuk, Hashem lokeichem hir ba'eschem. Hashem has increased you. V'hinchem hayom kechochei hashamayim lov. You're like the multitude of the stars in the heavens. So there seems to be some sort of cause and effect here. First, he says, "Look, I've given you look at the land that you're going to come and inherit the land which Hashem has sworn to your fathers." And then the very next line is, "And I said to you at that point, I can no longer carry you." So the Mefarshim say over here a very interesting insight. You see, what would your reaction be if I said to you, "Hey guys, listen, right after this year, I've prepared for you right out in the hall a feast." Well, hard to have a feast in the 9 days if it's going to be milchiks. But there's going to be a magnificent milchik lunch waiting for you right out here in the hall. I've sponsored it with every milchiks you could think of. You want pizza and you want more pizza. I can't think of anything milchik that's good other than cheesecake. For those who like cheesecake, and there's sushi. There you go, sushi. Now all you guys show how little class you have by getting excited over sushi. And there's going to be I contend people who like sushi probably drink Dr. Pepper too, which is it just confirms your deficiencies. But okay, here you are. There's going to be sushi and pizza, and I tell you what's going to be out there. What would your reaction be? Let's eat. Well, if you're a mensch, what would your reaction be?
Thank you. Say thank you.
Yeah. A mensch would say thank you. If you say let's eat, that even confirms it even more. A mensch is going to say, hey, well, thanks. That's really nice of you. I really appreciate that. Because there's a choice of that or yeshiva food. So and if it was not the 9 days, and I said, by the way, as soon as we finish here, I've sponsored. There's going to be steak, all you can eat out there. Like, wow, golly gee, well, thank you very much. It's very nice of you. So here Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, I showed you there's a land, Hashem has promised it to your fathers. And the Jewish people are like, silence. Well, why didn't anybody say something? Well, thank you. We should say Nishmas Kol Chai. We should say Hallel. Say something. Do something. Nothing. At that point, Moshe says, I cannot bear you alone. Now, what has that one thing got to do with the other? The answer is that a judge or a leader, he carries responsibility for the people. And if the people have flaws, then the flaws are going to be transferred over to him as well. He carries that responsibility. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I cannot carry the responsibility. It's one thing if you're all a bunch of tzaddikim and you're all wonderful. The fact that you're not answering and there's no gratitude over here, that's an indication of things to come. I don't know where this is going to go. I don't want this responsibility for you by myself. If you're all just a bunch of Boy Scouts and tzaddikim and everything is wonderful, then I can handle it because I don't have to worry that there are going to be misdeeds. But at the point that you're showing your colors by showing that there's a lack of gratitude, so what's going to be next? And then I got to bear that. I have to carry that. I can't carry that. I need other people to share the burden with me. That's what the Mefarshim say is the connection between how one pasuk follows the other. Then he turns and he says, Hashem Elokeichem hir ba'eschem v'hinchem hayom kechochei hashamayim lo'ov. And the plain meaning is that this is the reason that he can't bear the burden. Not because of the flaw, but the plain meaning is there are so many of you. You're abundant like the stars. Now, the question here is, why are the Jewish people compared to stars? What is the idea of being compared to stars? We compared the Jewish people are also compared to sand, and we're compared to the earth. There's more stars than sand. Do they know? Are there?
Apparently, yeah, there are.
There are more stars than sand.
Yeah, someone counted. I think they're saying that they're infinite.
They're infinite amount of stars, and like, it could be we're clueless. The idea of the stars. The idea of the stars is severalfold. Number one is obviously each star has a function. We don't know the functions, but each star just looks like, it's just kind of there. And the Jewish people look like just like it's one big mass of people. Each Jew has to realize he has an individual role. In the same way that every star has a function, certainly when you get to the idea of the constellations and the constellations exerting a force, the forces of the spirituality that coming through the various constellations and the various olamos, the various worlds, each star represents a Jew has to know you have a role to play. And a Jew may think to himself, well, I'm learning Makos and he's learning Makos. What is my learning worth if so many people are learning this Masechta? The answer is that every individual is serving God differently through his learning. And every individual is serving God differently through his challenges and through his life circumstances. And every individual is serving God by fulfilling his potential. And that's why the first mitzvah in the Torah is Pru. Why do we need so many people in the world? We need so many people because each person is a separate Kiddush Hashem. Each person serving God in his way, with his potential, his life circumstances, his overcoming his challenges. So each person is a star, number one. And a person has to know that your role is not a role that can be fulfilled by anybody else. And a person has to fulfill his role. And by the way, that's not just in our personality development, which is each person has to develop their personality to the best they can. It means that if let's say, for example, you find out, you discover one day that you've got a remarkable ability to fundraise for Torah. That's very likely an indication of that's one of your main purposes in life is to fundraise for Torah institutions. Let's say you're an excellent administrator. You could be an administrator for a yeshiva. Let's say you have the ability to be a teacher. It could be that that's your role, to be a teacher. Let's say you have the ability to be with Hatzalah. It could be that's your role in life is to be with Hatzalah. And a person, generally, if you have an inclination in that direction, that's probably one of the things you should be doing. We have different roles. We also have to get up and put on tefillin every day. It's not like, okay, I will be an administrator and therefore I'm absolved from putting on tefillin. But a person kind of moves in a certain direction. And I think I've mentioned in the past that your talents and your abilities are where you're going to achieve. Your desires, in other words, you go with your nature in achievement. You go against your nature in your midos development. It's a bit, the midos development is always is much harder. You go with your nature in order to achieve. You go against your nature in developing self-control. So if a person has a tendency towards anger, he has to go in the opposite direction. If a person has a tendency towards selfishness, he has to go in the opposite direction. If a person has a tendency towards ego, he has to go in this opposite direction. On the other hand, if you feel sort of a move in a certain direction, then that's very likely something that you're meant to be doing if it has a positive result. Number one. Number two, the idea of stars is, like we mentioned yesterday, that the Jewish people are meant to be a light to the nations. We're meant to be a light to the nations, and I told you yesterday that it's our behavior that the nations are gonna notice. They actually had a case here in Israel. They had a Beis Din, a regular Beis Din here, and there was a Din Torah. So a Din Torah means two Jews come to Beis Din to settle their dispute, whatever the argument is. We're going to see more about that in a second. So there was a Din Torah here in Israel, and the judge notices that one of the guys is an Arab. An Arab had some beef with a Jew, and they ended up at a Din Torah. So the judge turned to the Arab, and he said to the Arab, "Why are you coming here for a Din Torah?" The Arabs put on. They say, "What's your name?" He wasn't even trying to hide it. He says, "Well, why? What's that?" Exactly. The Arab said, "Because I know that I'm going to get justice here. I know that in a Din Torah I will get a fair shake. And if I go to a secular court, it's not going to be. It's certainly an Arab court. It's not going to be that way necessarily." And I know that. How did he notice it? Because they noticed, as I told you yesterday, because that's what we're stars. We are a light to the nations. If we're good, they notice us. They notice us when they're good. There are a number of cases of Rashi, as a matter of fact. Rashi, in the time of the Crusades. So, Rashi lived from 1040 till 1105. The first crusade was in 1096. And the Crusaders, there were the Christians riding across Europe to get to Palestine, to redeem Palestine from the Muslim infidels. That's what the first crusade was. And on the way, they basically slaughtered and destroyed any Jewish communities, because the Jews are certainly no good. So Rashi was living in a place called Troyes. Now, the legend is that there was a young priest at some point who was out destitute on the street, and Rashi brought him into his house, and he kind of fed him and clothed him, and he took care of him. And by the time of the Crusades, this young priest had already risen to become the archbishop of that region. And when the Crusaders came across, he gave the order to spare the city of Troyes, where Rashi was, because he remembered what Rashi had done for him when he was younger. So there are, it's what we do gets noticed. The Crusades was not a good period for the Jewish people by any stretch of the imagination. There were several Crusades. The first Crusade, there were Balei Tosfos who were actually killed. I think Rabbeinu Tam, if I'm not mistaken, Rabbeinu Tam was badly injured in one of the Crusades. So it was not a good period for the Jews. But that's what it means to be stars, is that we're going to be noticed. Number 3, there's a remarkable thing about, I once heard somebody who became a Baal Tshuva. And in his previous life, he was involved in show business. And eventually became a Baal Tshuva. And I was at his Sheva Brachas. I'll tell you where this came from. Actually, do you know that the Gemara says that Paro was 1 amma tall? You ever hear that Gemara? The Gemara says that Paro was 1 amma tall. An amma means about 18 to 24 inches tall. That's how tall Paro was. And there's another medrash that says Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned over the entire world, he was katan kikad. He was the size of a jug. This is about that. Now, that's a very strange thing. Paro was the most powerful ruler in the ancient world, and he was the size 1 amma tall. And Nebuchadnezzar, who was the most powerful ruler in his era, he was the size of a jug. Both of them could walk under this table without bending their feet. Now, I don't understand, to be an emperor in the ancient world, was that what you put on your resume? Yes, I could bite people in the shins. Right? I guess that's why they were afraid of Nebuchadnezzar. He was so vicious, he could bite people in the shins. That's why you became an emperor? Because you were because if they played one-on-one? What's going on over here? So that's what the Medrash says. And when I understood that Medrash, when this person who was involved in his previous life in show business, he got up at his own Sheva Brachas and he said that he was hobnobbing with all these world-famous names. People who are all, people that we've all heard of, world famous people. He said, but when you got to know them up close, he said they were really very small people. And that's when the coin dropped. That's when I understood that's what the Medrash means. You could be a Paro and you could be a Nebuchadnezzar, but you know what? You're really what they call in the Yiddish, you're a kleiner Mensch. You're a small-minded person. You make issues over petty little things. The Chazon Ish, he used to say, he had a saying, Katan eino godol, v'godol eino katan. A small person is not a big person, and a big person is not a small person. A petty person is not a big person. And I remember reading this line from the Chazon Ish, and I remember thinking to myself, there's nothing, what's so profound about that? A small person is not a big person is not a little person. What's so profound? And you know what? It is profound. Because I remember when there was an issue that came up in the house and I was going to start bickering about something. And I remember thinking to myself, a big person is not a little person. And I want my family to see me as a big person, not as a little person. And so I, maintain silence. So they should at least at least I could deceive them into thinking I'm a big person. Because if I make an issue out of that, I'm a little person. I don't want to be seen as a little person. None of us do. We all want to be seen as big people, not as little people. And now I'm going to go make an issue because somebody bought a sweater that cost $20 more than I really wanted it to cost, and I'm going to make a fight over that. So what does that show about me? What does that say about me? That means I'm a little person. I don't want to be a little person. I want to be a big person. So I'm a big person. I'm broke, but I'm a big person, right? But at least that's what that's Paro. What's a Jew? Sometimes you're sitting in a room, there's a guy over here, he's a regular guy, and he's a regular guy, and the guy in shul, he's just an ordinary Jew, and he's a regular Jew. And you know what ends up happening, and I've seen this, I've experienced this in life, and unfortunately, it only happens after a person is nifter. And then you go to the house to be Menachem Oval, and you hear stories about this guy. You say, do you know that for the last 40 years, he didn't miss one Daf Yomi shiur? Really? And do you know that every Shabbos, he was the guy who stayed in shul and he organized the shul, even though it meant getting home later than everybody? Really? I had no idea. And do you know that there were 11 families that he supported on the side, 11 poor families that he supported? I had no idea. And what happens is that when you meet a Jew, he seems like a regular person. And the closer you get to him, the bigger he becomes. That's the comparison to a star. How big are the stars out there? Looks like a little dot. It'll only take you about 3 million light years to get to the nearest star. I'm sure there'll be a line of volunteers if NASA would, they have this project of going to Mars, and it's going to take 3 years to get to Mars. They have a waiting list for volunteers to go to Mars. Can you imagine? And a Jew, the closer you get to the Jew, the bigger he becomes. If you had an opportunity to spend a day with the Chafetz, we've heard of the Chafetz Chaim. You've heard of Reb Moshe Feinstein. If you had an opportunity to spend one day with Reb Moshe Feinstein, you would walk away dizzy at the end of the day. What a person. Most people, they become smaller. Family members, the people outside, we're great outside the house. Outside the house, we're gentlemen and we're polite. Then you come home and everybody knows what you are in the house, because then you drop your guard. If you spend a day with Reb Moshe Feinstein, it wouldn't be that way. With Reb Moshe Feinstein, he's even bigger and bigger. Every Jew is a star. Every Jew, there's more about people that we don't even realize how big people are. I don't know. I saw you in shul, but I don't know your challenge of getting to shul. I saw you give some tzedakah. I don't know your challenge, what your personality is and how connected you are to money and what it took to overcome that. And if you could really see a Jew for what he is, then you see a Jew as you. That's getting closer to the stars. Getting even closer. Number 3. There was a famous. You guys, please help me out now. Don't disappoint me. You've heard of Mickey Mantle?
Yes.
Oh wow, shkoyach. Finally somebody they've heard of. You heard of Mickey Mantle? Okay, so Mickey Mantle.
He's the Disney character, right?
Yeah, Mickey Mantle is the Disney character. Mickey Mantle, who was an American hero. Mickey Mantle. I have nothing against Mickey Mantle per se. He was the American hero. He was bigger than life. Mickey Mantle was an alcoholic basically his entire baseball career. His entire career, he was an alcoholic. He used to go into restaurants with his friends and his wife. I almost cried when I read this. I almost cried when I saw this. He would go in with his friends and his wife, and he would hold a chair for his wife. He'd pull out a chair, and as she sat down, he pulled the chair out and let her. She went sprawling on the floor. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? And everybody would laugh. Now, the lady, I don't know how it happened to her more than once. That's her fault. Next time, just make sure you grab the chair with it. This is the American hero. This is the finest guy in the world. Michael Jordan. Yeah, Michael Jordan was, bigger than life. When the Bulls won their last championship, I'm only saying, their second three-peat. Oh, those were good days, by the way. Oh, those were good days. When the Bulls won the second championship, so they had a journeyman player named Joe Klein on the team, who had been in the NBA for about 17 years. He was always a backup, insignificant, never won a championship. When they won the championship, the second time Joe Klein was on the team, and they were in the locker room after they won a championship, Joe Klein was crying because he finally won a championship. And Michael Jordan walked past him and he said to him, "What are you crying about? I won it for you." This is the American hero. That's what they always used to say, be like Mike. And then the stories came out about what Mike is really like. And one of the famous writers, one of the sports writers said, be like Mike. Heck, we already are. Because, we all got this. But when you look in a Torah Jew is a star. One last point. There's another idea of the star. This is one of my favorite ideas. When were the stars created? What were they? Where's the background of the stars? What does the Medrash say? Hashem created the sun and the moon, the Me'oros HaGedolim. They were both created the same size. So the moon came to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and said, hey, we can't have two kings with one crown, two kings, each one wearing a crown. So Hashem said to the moon, you're absolutely right, go reduce yourself. I'm sure the moon at that point was thinking, that's not where I was going with this. And Hashem says, you reduce yourself. So the moon was depressed. So what did Hashem do for the moon? He created the stars. What was the point of the stars? That the moon should feel, look, you're in charge of all of them. So what was the whole inception? The stars were brought about in order to make somebody else feel good, in order to make the moon feel good. That's why Jews are compared to stars. Our job in life is to reduce pain by others and make them feel good. That's why we're compared to stars. We have to ask ourselves always, the interaction I had with this person, did he just walk away from me a happier person or a less happy person? And if people are walking away from us happier, then we're fulfilling our job as a Jew and as stars. And if people are walking away from us happy to be walking away from us, then we're not fulfilling our job. I'll tell you an unbelievable story. There was a first grade class, and the first graders came in, and they were nervous as heck. A bunch of little 5 and 6 year olds are sitting there in the classroom, and it's their first day of class, and the Rabbi is there, and he's walking, and he starts talking to these kids, and all of a sudden he sees one of the kids, and there's a little puddle under his chair. And the kid was nervous, and the puddle under the kid's chair. Now the Rabbi understood right away, if the other kids find out about this, that's it for his career. I mean, his social career is basically over. So what did the Rebbe do? He picked up his drink and he started walking around the room, just walking over to the kids. And as he got over to this kid, he accidentally stumbled and spilled his drink all over this kid. So now everybody who didn't notice, they see also there's a puddle under his chair, obviously because the Rebbe just spilled the water, and she said, oh, go to the office and change your clothes. And he saves the kid the shame and the embarrassment of the other kids knowing that he pitched on the floor. So a person understands that's the job. That's what a star is. That's why we're compared to stars. The same way that the inception of the stars was in order to make sure that others around us feel good, especially if they're down in the dumps. Our job is to make them feel good, except if they're White Sox fans. But other than that, our job is to make them feel good. And therefore, all you sushi eaters, I have to figure out some way to make you feel good about yourselves, because you're probably pretty down on yourselves. So I have to figure out some way to make you feel good about yourselves. And I have nothing to say, right? I guess, my daughter, my son-in-law went out and bought my daughter sushi the other night. I was crushed. How much I pay for that? For what? For some rice? For some rice with some illegal weed on it? I guess so. I guess illegal weed, must cost a lot. My goodness. But, so that's our job. Our job as Torah Jews is to be stars. Okay. See you on Wednesday. I'm not going to be here tomorrow.